Facebook.
Hi guys.
Welcome to the Tall and the Short of It with
Betsy
and Jenny. I'm super glad to have my partner in crime back this week. Thank you so much to everybody who shared and commented and things on last week.
Hey Jake.
Hey Jake, there she is. So I just had so much fun meeting at Erskine Green with Fenway. That was really cool. If you haven't seen it, go back and check that one out. It was pretty neat. But it's April, and we are on spring break, but we came to school.
Still, we get 2 weeks spring break.
We do.
I think everybody else around us is already back in school. So,
Hi, Landry.
I'm actually on time. We're not on time. I've been sitting here waiting on her.
I know. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Actually, we're early compared to what we normally do.
I know, but considering when you got in my classroom.
True.
Before we get into the big topic of April, what have you been doing on spring break?
I did some cleaning, which is not extremely exciting. I did, I don't know. I really haven't done a lot. I mean, lots of catching up on shows that I've gotten behind on that I really like, and getting pumped up for the Game of Thrones, season 8 coming up. But, that's just me. I'm a big geek like that. But yeah, just kind of relaxing and a little bit of a staycation. Didn't really go anywhere. Anything. You went to Brown County, though.
Yes.
So tell us about yours.
It was nice. We went. The hotel we stayed in. My mom and I take my nephews. I'm usually on breaks and things. We had a little indoor water park, so the boys loved that. Mm-hmm. And then we went hiking, and my mom's probably not. Well, she won't care. So on our hike, it was very muddy, and there were some incredibly muddy spots. But one of my nephews we were trying to get through this muddy spot, and one nephew made it through. I made it through, and then my next nephew was behind me, and then my mom. Well, my nephew tried to go through this muddy spot in not a great way, and about lost his balance and would have went down. So my mom saved him from going down, and which there was a hill right next to where we were on like a path, and right next to it. Anyways, then lots of trees and then a lake. So and to keep him from rolling down the hill and falling, she saved him. However, in saving him, she went face first into the mud.
Oh, ouch.
I will say,
that was brave, Miss Nancy.
I laughed so I felt awful. I couldn't stop laughing. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
could not stop laughing, but bless her heart. And we weren't even halfway through our hike. We still had more but hey, we had fun. And she kept telling, my nephew felt horrible. She kept saying, we're making memories. We had fun. It was a good time. Better than last year. Last year it snowed down there when we went.
Oh my gosh.
And we really didn't get to hike.
I said it did snow here.
It did. But you know what?
Weekend.
I had my windows open yesterday. Yesterday and day 4, while I was cleaning, and so you could see out my window that there was still snow on the ground on the north side of my house. But I had my windows open.
It's all gone at my house now. All right, so on to our topic for April. This is Autism Awareness Month. And we are going to be talking about autism all 4 weeks. And we just posted the graphic if you didn't see that for this
Patty.
month. Hey, and the graphic has the topics we're going to be talking about. I'm super excited about the bells that are still going on right now.
Yeah.
That's so strange.
School's out.
Yeah. But I'm excited about the last week of the month because that is the Autism Walk and 5K in Muncie. And so we're going to be
at the fairgrounds.
At the Delaware County Fairgrounds, yep. And so I am going to post tomorrow. If anybody's interested in putting a team together for that or whatever, if you want to register, I'll post that tomorrow. So if anybody's interested in jumping in on the autism
a
walk.
lot of fun. We have done it as a school corporation. Our autism team did it a few years ago. So, and it's pretty neat.
It's a cool thing. They've got a whole vendor fair, and there's lunch, and it's pretty neat.
And we'll talk more about this organization later, but Interlock is the organization that sponsors this. So, anyways, yeah.
All right, so that's going to be really cool, but I will post that link tomorrow for people that are interested in the walk. All right, so today's topic is identification and evaluation, because as we all know, autism is a pretty hot topic in education because of the needs of those students. So today we're just going to do an overview and what you need to know about identification and evaluation if you believe your child or if you are a teacher working with kids with autism. Or you might have a relative or, something like that. So what is autism, right? There's that, what is it out there? Well, it's a lifelong developmental disability. So it's not one of those things that you're gonna get rid of or cure or anything like that. If you have autism, that you have autism for life. And it has, the signs of it will appear in early childhood, usually around 18 months to 2 years old. Now, why would we think that that's the case? Well, it's because of the rest of the definition. Because it's going to affect that person's ability to communicate and interact with other people. So prior to 18 months of age, our little ones, our infants, communicate with us basically through nonverbals,
yes,
right? And some verbal, meaning crying and making their wishes known through noise,
yes,
right? But a lot of nonverbals, we can see from their face if they're hurt or they're upset or they're happy or sad. So, but when they should start talking and communicating with other people is when you're going to notice that these signs are going to appear. But yes, so just reiterating, lifelong disability with signs appearing in early childhood, usually around 18 months to 2 years, that are going to affect their ability to communicate and interact with others.
And I mean, we'll probably talk about this a little more later, but I just want to clarify, I guess, like that lifelong disability doesn't mean that the way they're appearing when they're young that's how it will always be. They can make improvements through interventions, and early intervention is so important. So important. However, it's still something that they're still going to struggle with aspects of this. So, while like I said, early intervention is huge, and I'll talk a little bit about the early signs to look for. But yes, just because that lifelong disability piece doesn't mean there can't be improvements and, they can't make progress with these things. So,
So Betsy's going to talk about early signs to look for if you're worried about your child that's not talking or, things like that.
And just to note, like, when I bring up these, and when I talk about these signs, if you're like, okay, so what do? I do have some of these concerns. Just talk to your doctor. When you take your child for their baby, check, just say, hey, I've noticed this. Just bring those things up. And they're probably questions your doctor will be asking to be checking along these lines too, especially as your child gets older.
And the other piece of that too is sometimes, and I'm not going to say this about all doctors, but sometimes doctors will blow you off the first time you mention these things because they think you're you're helicopter parenting. They think you're being overly concerned about things you shouldn't be concerned with. But if it's a real concern for you, don't back down on it. Be like, no, seriously, this is a problem. So...
Okay, well, one of the signs would be lack or delay of spoken language, which we kind of chatted about. And that's going to be a big one because it really does affect that communication, that verbal communication piece.
And just as a side note to that one, a lot of times kids on the autism spectrum can be mistaken for being hearing impaired at that age because you'll talk to them and they'll just completely ignore you. And it's not because they can't hear you. It's probably because they don't care what you have to say, and their language isn't developed enough to talk back at that point, or or they just aren't talking yet.
Right.
They're not going to acknowledge what you just said, because you're not in the thing that they're doing. That's a more preferred activity is way more important to them
Right.
at this point.
Right.
So a little bit of selective attention.
Yes.
Can serve that, but it's not. But part of it is that they also don't have the ability yet to talk back to you the way they need to.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Another one to watch for is repetition in language. Sorry, I told Jenny there's a lot of really big words in all of our notes here today, and repetitive motor mannerisms. So. That repetitive language, like if they're repeating back what you're saying to them, or often you might be reading a story and they're repeating back when you're reading, they're saying what you're saying. Or if you're watching a show on TV, they're repeating what the characters are saying. And
it's not like a typical kid learning language. Like when we're typically teaching a child language, we're like, it's a flower, say flower, and then they say flower, and so you repeat. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about you say, do you want milk? And the kid says, do you want milk?
Yeah.
And they're not replying in a way that is.
And a lot of times it's, I won't go into what. Anyways. But then also some motor manners that repetitive could be the rocking.
Hand flapping.
Hand flapping.
Is a big one.
Any kind of self-stem like that.
Rocking. Hands over the ears.
Yes.
Pulling on their ears like this. A lot of things that there's something sensory going on there. And
those will often, they don't always, but those will often happen when they're trying to self-soothe themselves. Like if they're upset about something or they're not liking the situation, what's happening.
Another really big one's toe walking.
Yes.
And a lot of kids toe walk, but they grow out of it quickly as they stretch out the backs of their Achilles and all of that. But kids on the spectrum tend to toe walk for a long time, like years. So if you notice your kid is super toe walking, that is, and we're not saying every kid who toe walks has autism. What we're saying is these are all signs, and if you have tons of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if your child is toe walking, but they don't have any of these other signs, then it's probably
just a motor thing, and you need to talk to the doctor about why their legs aren't stretching out.
Yes. So, and this is probably one a lot of people know about, but little to no eye contact. And that just because they're not giving you eye contact doesn't mean they're not engaged in what you're saying to them. It may not, but just when they are responding to you or when they are listening to you, they're not going to be giving you that eye contact. They really have they have no interest in having relationships with people, whether it be their peers, you as their primary caregiver, or maybe,
They may act like they're not a cuddler. Like you want them to get on your lap and cuddle, and they're like, they don't want to do that.
And they're not going to play with other kids their age. And actually, a lot of times you might see them even remove themselves, like putting themselves farther away from.
And typically developing toddlers will do parallel play. So they'll be like a toddler here and a toddler here, and they're all playing with toys, but they're not really playing together.
And they might be playing with the same toys, like maybe they're all playing with a dollhouse, but they're not interacting with each other.
And a kid on the spectrum is never going to leave that stage. So as a kid is maybe 1-year-olds are going to parallel play, and then by 2 years old to 3 years old, they're going to start playing together and make believe and things like that. Whereas kids on the spectrum are just going to continue parallel play. They don't really want to interact with the peer.
Well, and they also have a lack of like spontaneous or make-believe play. They really struggle to have that imagination. Everything is very black and white, and it
reminds me of the tractor on your field trip.
Oh. And if you try to make believe or play with them, you're nuts. That's what we went on a field trip one year, and one of my students was on it. It was a real tractor, but it wasn't working. All the important, it didn't turn on or whatever, and you could sit on it and pretend. I said, "Where are we going?" And nowhere. It doesn't go. Like
it's broken.
It's broken. Like what? So I'm like, Yeah, they just, really struggle with, sorry, I just kicked the table. They just really struggle with that. And I mean, and you probably aren't going to see them using, okay, for example, like so many of my kids will use a remote for a phone. No, a phone's a phone, a remote's a remote. They,
Very
even though,
literal.
to them, this kind of looks the same, and they'll, no, very literal. Phone's a phone, a remote's a remote. And then, very persistent fixations on objects or like a specific object. A lot of times, and I'm going to use Thomas as an example, and just because your child likes Thomas doesn't mean they're on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Trust me. I know a lot about Thomas, and I have yet to watch it with
The train for you guys.
Oh
that
yes,
aren't
Thomas
on
the
that
tank,
link.
Thomas the tank engine. But kids on the spectrum tend to like trains, but they just, I mean, it's an obsession to the point, like it made me think when you said they don't respond to you. Well, by golly, if they're watching Thomas or with their fixation, maybe it's with baseballs, or maybe it's it could be anything.
Vacuum cleaners.
Yes.
Batman. I've had that one before.
Yes. Superheroes in general.
Yeah, they love that. Which is funny because they don't do make believe.
Right. Well, and I will say, a student I had just liked to have things in their, sorry, I was looking for things in their hands. I'm going to, like a pointer, but they wanted to be able to hold something like this, and he would bring something different every single day. I mean, it was fantastic. I have like pictures of, like, I mean, it might be a toothbrush, it might be a play. One day it was one of the things the doctors get you, like, tap you on the knee with to check your reflex. The craziest things would come.
Titanic, yes.
Yes.
That's a big one.
So things, so I mean, while the object for this particular child wasn't the same, it served the same purpose. See, I can't do this, we're backwards.
I know.
It served the same purpose of them holding something in their hand. So, so yeah, those are some early signs, and like we said, that's just something to talk to your doctor about. And just because your child has one or even two of these signs doesn't mean
a big one that I've heard a lot of parents that I started having a thought when that also kind of picky eating is another one that we didn't really list, but they'll only eat certain things or certain textures. And they only like certain, like they have to have all the tags on their clothes cut out and things like that. That's another big one. But another thing just to think about, like if you give them cars, what is a typical boy going to do with a car? They're going to roll it around like they're driving and vroom, vroom, and make car noises and do all that. You hand a box of Matchbox cars to a kid on the autism spectrum, they're just going to sort them by colors and probably line them up in a straight line.
And I do want to say, though, too, just because they line them up in a straight line, like, that's, I mean, I know that, like, my nephew liked to line his trains up to see how many he had. Like, so I mean,
but then he would play with them, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, he played with them. But I'm just saying, like, I know a lot of kids do line things up, but it can be like, we're parking or we're doing this. Kind of watch how that's happening. Or what's the purpose? Does it serve a purpose? Are they verbalizing what that purpose is? Instead of, like I said, just because, like, I know that they say lining things up, and it's not just cars. They're going to line
anything.
Yeah,
up. Any object.
Like, are they?
I was just using that as one example.
No, but you're right. But I also wanted to point out,
it's
like,
just they'll use the toys in a way that is different from their intended purpose.
Yeah. But I just want, because I see a lot of people post on Facebook like, oh, look, and just because they've done that doesn't mean it's just. Like
I said, you should never think that one thing in isolation means your kid's on the spectrum.
There's more to the story to learn.
Absolutely. This is not an exact science, guys.
Which is why
the
very next thing says.
Yes, autism is a spectrum. So I'm almost coming to believe everything in life is, though.
True.
Pretty much.
Can I share? I told Jenny there was a graphic on Instagram, one of the accounts I follow, that I loved, because I think when we think, I know I'm guilty of when I go to explain. Like, it's a spectrum, and my hands do this.
Do a line.
We do
straight
this.
line.
It made a color wheel. It was a graphic of a color wheel, and it was like, stop thinking about the autism spectrum as a line. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I need.
Because each piece of pie in that color wheel could be sensory, language. It could be all the pieces parts, and they may be at different places in that specific.
Well, or if you think of it as like your color wheel turning into a pie chart, and like each color might take up a different amount of space.
Exactly.
You know.
Right. So we many times though they'll refer to kids on the spectrum as either high functioning or low functioning. They don't really say any other things, right?
Right.
So when we think of a high functioning person with autism, which they used to call Asperger's, they don't really use that term as much anymore.
Well, they took it out.
Of the
DSM.
The DSM-5. So they used to call it Asperger's though. In order to be high functioning on the autism spectrum, you have to have normal intelligence, which means IQ has to be above 85. And you have to have where your language did develop normally. So you had met all the milestones for language as you came up. Now you may still have some social communication issues, may not understand sarcasm, may have trouble with like different types of figurative language, you know, you're still too literal and black and white, you know, that kind of stuff. And you may have social awkwardness and a lot of other social issues communicating with others, and maybe have trouble working well with people and groups and, you know, things like that. But your language developed normally and you have a normal IQ. So that means you could be a person on the spectrum that's high functioning. Okay, these people are going to have jobs most of the time. They're going to be able to create and develop and, you know, and do the things that other, you know, adults
They're
do.
going to have a much easier time participating in the general education classroom.
Absolutely, they're going to get a diploma.
They're going to need less support.
If they have the right supports, they'll get a diploma.
And probably, and like I say though, but it probably will be a little less, or, you know, as that support will be able to be removed as.
Now, kids who are high functioning on the spectrum can have behavioral issues. So depending on how self-aware they are and their coping skills and their self-regulation, all those things have to be taught. And that's what special education is for those students, okay? So then we go to the low functioning end, and what we think of for that is they also have a intellectual disability. And a lot of times there are other diagnoses, and we'll get to that here in just a minute, that are added on when you get diagnosed with autism. Like they may say intellectual disability if you have a low IQ.
And I will say something that's important to remember, and especially, I mean, us as teachers, it's hard, sometimes to know, because of the communication, because of the language impairment, it can be extremely hard to know where that IQ or what their
Sometimes
intellect,
we can't even
what
measure
that capability is. And you know, the more you get to know that child, you know there's more in there. And you just have to find the way.
Stat that you found like 30% are nonverbal? Is it 30?
I think so.
It's either 30 or 35.
It might have been it was 1/3.
Is it 1/3?
1/3.
So around 33%.
Yeah. Okay.
So 1/3 of people who are diagnosed with autism are completely nonverbal. So we would consider those more low functioning because they're not going to be able to participate unless they show us somehow that something's going on there and we can get them some assistive technology. I
was telling you as we were researching and stuff, you were talking to me and I was, I got distracted.
I love you.
I got distracted.
Speaking of having a hard time finding language. No, I'm kidding. I'm the one that always gets accused of being on the spectrum a little bit. So.
But I got distracted because I was looking at someone's Facebook page, and there was a person with autism who was completely nonverbal and was training for the Boston Marathon. I didn't get to watch the whole thing.
Yes, because some people with autism can communicate with technology. But we have to find that right match
I didn't
for
see,
them.
like I said, I didn't watch the whole thing, and it did. I did read a little bit, like they had a coach, and it was a video, so I'll have to go back and watch it.
That's super cool.
Maybe I'll have you remind me, and
Yeah,
I'll
we
have
can
you.
post it.
We can share it.
Yeah,
but
for
yeah,
sure.
so I mean, it's just so hard. Again, you may have heard this. We say it and hear it and all the time. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. They are all so different. Do they have things that are similar? Yes, but so do all of us. So, I mean, Jenny and I both have curly hair, but
but
we
our
could
curly
not-
hair is very different.
It is very different.
Your
and
texture and our
we
color. And
could not be more different. Jenny and I just enjoy, there's so many things that are alike with us, but there again are so many things that are so different with us.
For sure.
So let me ask a question, Jenny.
Okay.
What causes autism?
Ooh, okay, so let's address the elephant in the room here. Because we all know there is controversy out there about what causes autism. And the best science definition I can tell you, or science thing I can tell you, is there's no known single cause. There is not one established. It is generally accepted that and medical personnel agree that it's caused by abnormalities in the brain structure and function, okay? Because they can actually take a picture of the brain of people with autism and of neurotypical people and see a difference in the shape and the structure of their brains. And the other thing they can do, and I just thought of this, was I went to a workshop where they were talking about executive function and how the autistic brain works. And different areas, those little scans they can do where they'll do something with a person and then different parts of their brain will light up. I don't know, forget what those are called, whether they're PET scans, CAT scans, I don't know what they are, but I'm not a doctor. But, hey Scott, but in the autistic brain, different sections of the brain light up than someone with a neurotypical brain when they present them with the same thing. So like, I'm going to give this person a reward and this person a reward. And a person with a neurotypical brain, this section of their brain will light up. A person with autism, a different section of their brain lights up during that. So like, there are definite differences in brain scans. So they know that it's abnormalities in brain structure and function. So they are researching other theories, though, as those come up. So one of them is surrounding heredity and genetics, that whole thing. And then another one is that people with certain medical conditions are more likely to have autism. A couple that I can just give you as examples are Fragile X syndrome. If you're diagnosed with Fragile X, you are more likely to be on the autism spectrum. Or PKU, which has a big giant word that I can't say. That's another medical condition that's comorbid with autism a lot of times. But they're also doing research on pregnant mothers and their exposure to different chemicals and different things they ingest or are exposed to in the air and things like that, and whether or not there is more of a correlation of their children having autism or not too. There's tons of research going on in that field, but there is no known single cause. Now, I am definitely one of those people, and I think Betsy is too, she can claim on this, that we are of the camp that vaccines do not cause autism, so do not be afraid to vaccinate your children. Remember, this is our live, and it's our opinions. So we are not on that bandwagon of vaccines cause autism. No. So, let's talk about the big thing here. This is, I think, probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today, is that this is so complicated and difficult for people to understand.
I don't know. I just remembered something that we were going to talk about and
Oh,
haven't, which we will hear later, but this one might be pretty important too because...
Yeah, it is. It is. We'll wrap up with that.
Yes, but no.
She wrote
sorry,
a note. Okay.
So this is what I geek out on down here, what I wrote my note about. Okay.
So the big thing I wanted for us to talk about today was diagnosis. And why would you need a medical diagnosis versus an educational diagnosis? because this is they're two different things, and they have two very different purposes.
And I even would hesitate to pair the word diagnosis with the educational piece of it.
It's
I would
eligibility.
Eligibility, or like, I mean, sad, but it is the whole label piece of it. But
so more medical diagnoses versus educational eligibility.
Yeah.
Because schools don't diagnose.
No.
We are not even allowed to diagnose your child with autism.
Well, we're not. We're not qualified.
Right. In some ways. we don't have medical degrees.
We're not qualified to give a diagnosis. We're qualified
to give an eligibility. That's correct. And only our psychologists are qualified to give that eligibility in cooperation with that child's team.
Yes.
Which includes the parent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they are a very big part of that.
Yeah.
So let's talk medical first.
Okay.
The big reason.
Hey, Kathy.
Hey. The big reason that you want a medical diagnosis given by either a doctor or a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist. It's very important. It has to be clinical in a clinic, outside, private clinic somewhere, or outside clinic. Can be a mental health organization, can be a community clinic. Any of those, a lot of places can do diagnoses. And I'll post some lists. One of the posts this week, I'll post a list of places you can get a medical diagnosis. So that way, if you're looking for that, you have some numbers you can call and check it out. And there will be waiting lists. I'm just going to tell you that. It's kind of a big thing. As in everything in special ed, there's always a waiting list, right?
Yep.
So the reason you need medical diagnosis has everything to do with money and quality of life. Money, because if your child has a medical diagnosis of autism, number one, you can apply for SSI for them, so supplemental Social Security income that you can get on a monthly basis to help you care for that child, because having a child on the spectrum is expensive, extremely expensive, and we'll talk about that later in our stats. You also can apply for autism waiver through the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities, which if you need more info on Medicaid waivers, go back to last month and check out the live we did on Medicaid waivers. And then the other thing is, if your child's going to need ABA services, which if they have some significant behaviors that need to be changed and replaced with more appropriate behavior, you might need ABA for your child with autism. So you need a medical diagnosis in order for Medicaid or your insurance to cover that.
Yes.
And Indiana is awesome about insurance covering autism services. So, but you have to have that medical diagnosis. Without it, it is nearly impossible to get ABA services. And then last but not least, adult services. In order for you to qualify for any adult services, you have to have that medical diagnosis. So 4 things: SSI, Medicaid waiver, outside resources like ABA or therapies of some sort that you might need to go along with it, and then your adult services. So those 4 reasons for the medical diagnosis. You want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to talk about educational.
Go ahead.
So, so when the educational piece, and we kind of talked about previously what that looks like that whole evaluation process and stuff. So that's in a previous video. But in order for us to give that eligibility, check that box for that eligibility area, we have to be sure they have enough of those characteristics that we see through our testing. And so I would fill out as the teacher would fill out rating scales, parents fill out rating scales, and maybe have more than one teacher or, more than one person that sees this child during the day. And then it has to be impacting their education, their access to that general education curriculum.
Right.
So
they have to be progressing. If they're not progressing, then they're not being provided with that free, appropriate public education that they're entitled to. And they need that specially designed instruction in order to make progress.
But if it's, they might be having some social issues, and I'm not saying that's not a problem, but that's really their biggest impact and it's not affecting their education,
Right.
then that's not something, no, that would
Right.
not qualify them.
Right.
Like
Not
I said,
not necessarily.
So what we're getting at is and say you already have, in reality, you would, you're going to need or, look at doing evaluation for both.
Mm-hmm.
And it is nice if you have the medical piece kind of first to give the school more information
Mm-hmm.
to make their decision. But sorry, I was like, what was I getting at? I don't know. Distracted. But so really you kind of want to, like I said, do both, because that medical diagnosis provides that support outside of school, but that eligibility provides the support inside the school.
Exactly.
And they don't.
Right. You can't just bring a medical diagnosis to school and we'll write up an IEP.
No.
You have to go through the educational eligibility piece, which is that 50-day timeline. It takes some time for us to do observations, look at all of that child's educational records, to have a psychologist or our school psychiatrist. School psychologist.
I don't know what school she's working at, but
I wish we had one of those. That'd be cool. But to have the school psychologist do the testing that's necessary, required under Indiana's special ed law, and then to write up a report that gives us all the data and information in one place. They do some occupational therapy, they do some speech therapy
they
stuff.
do language stuff.
All of that evaluation has to be done. We bring all that data together, and then we determine, are there enough characteristics, and is it impacting their education in a negative way? And if that's the case, then they could qualify.
When I lost my thought, just because you have one does not automatically mean you get the other. On either end, the school might say, you know what, when we did testing, we saw a lot of characteristics. We feel like they would fall under that category. Could you, hey, next time maybe chat with your doctor about this? And the doctor's like,
says, nope.
And
you're like, okay. I mean, they're going to get the supports they need in school, eligibility wise, but maybe they didn't get the medical diagnosis, so the family supports aren't going to be there.
Right.
It can also be vice versa. I've had that where they have a medical diagnosis, they come in, they ask for testing from the school, we do all of our testing, and we don't see any educational impact. And so we have done 504 plans for kids who have that medical diagnosis of autism that just need a few reasonable accommodations. Maybe some extra time testing or, things like that, which is very easy to do, and a school could do that, no problem, if your child needs those accommodations.
And that's why these decisions are all made as part of your child's, or as a team, or a part of that child's case conference committee, and we bring all those people to the table that are knowledgeable in each of their areas that can help make those decisions.
Okay, so just some quick facts, and then we're going to wrap up with Betsy's topic she wrote on a sticky note down here. So
they're all on the edge of their seats wanting to know what this topic is.
Oh my gosh, wait for it. So the CDC, Center for Disease Control's data in 2018 says now that it's 1 in 59 births in the United States gets a diagnosis of autism, which is way up from when I think it was in 2000 it was like 1 in 159 or something like that, or 1 in 200 or something crazy like that. It's like 1 in 59 is like, oh my gosh, that's mind blowing. It's the fastest growing developmental disability. And then I said we were going to talk about the money. So you want to give them that stat?
All right. So autism services cost the U.S. And when we say this, I don't just mean educational services. I just mean autism is costing, period.
Taxpayer dollars
is
we're talking about here.
The U.S. between $236 and $262 billion annually.
Right.
And most of those, that cost is adult services.
Yeah, because it's covering all the supports that they need after they leave high school. Because when they're in school, the school is covering a lot of that through special education. So the majority of that public assistance is going to adults.
Because I actually
on
said
the
to Jenny,
spectrum.
I wonder about that money. I said, are they including that special education
doubt
money?
it.
So that money is actually, that amount that it's costing is even more. Because I will say it does take a big, because that
Right.
it's the fastest growing. We're getting more and more kiddos.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I thought this one was very interesting and sad at the same time, because of sometimes they have that inability to work cooperatively or interact appropriately with other adults. 35% of young adults on the spectrum who received a diploma are not able to find or keep a job. So that's a problem, and that's something that as advocates we need to keep our eye out on legislation or things like that that are going to help support people finding and keeping a job on the spectrum. I think that's something we don't always think about, because they got a diploma, they should be able to get a job and keep a job. Well, sometimes, you know,
Well, and
when
you have to remember,
those
if you
issues.
stop and think, well, we did all of this and prepared them and worked with them in school, you know, we do work towards, especially when they get into high school, we do work towards that. However, that's still with support, and that's still with someone.
And it was usually with a lot of support.
Yeah, and that's just with someone checking in and giving feedback, and that doesn't, you know, that's just not how it happens when we're adults and
maybe
jobs.
helping them to maybe some better career counseling for them on finding a career that's going to fit their personality. You know, if they don't like working with people, what are jobs where you don't have to work with other people?
Right. Well,
you know?
but I also think education in the workplace for the if they are working with people.
What kinds of visual supports might they need? What kinds of
and just educating those employers that would be possibly hiring them that you know, how can you as an employer support?
Well, and how can you educate your other employees to be accepting of someone on the spectrum that might work there? So that's another big thing too. All right, talk about it.
Okay. Can't believe we haven't brought her up. Oh, Temple Grandin.
Temple Grandin.
I love her. I've met her twice. Had conversation with her. Have actually had conversation with her. And I think you were with me one time when we saw her, and then I saw her. I think you were with me the second time I saw her.
Yes.
And I saw her speak. However, I just want to say, she. If you don't know let me explain that. If you don't know who Temple Grandin is, you need to look her up.
You need to watch her movie.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Let me just say, Temple is a professor at the University of Colorado, or Colorado State. She works I'm trying to think now which one it is. I can't remember. However, she is such a huge advocate for autism. However, that's not her job. She actually designs slaughterhouses for cattle. And
humane.
Yes, humane. That was her.
Yes.
And if you seriously watch the movie, it'll explain everything.
It explains everything.
And Claire Danes does a fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Let me say this: I saw the movie before I met Temple, and listen to me talk about her like we're
like your buds.
We're buds. But when I met her, I think one of the very first things I thought was, oh my gosh, Claire Danes captured her perfectly.
Oh yeah,
she did a great job.
Very much so.
But there's just such interesting things in that movie, things that you don't maybe recognize or realize. But she also does a really good job of describing, and she talks about it in the movie, but she also, hang on, I'm going to sneeze.
She talks about how people on the spectrum learn and really breaks that down in a way that is so interesting. I think the most interesting piece to me, that kind of aha moment for me when I heard her speak this last time, was when she was talking about that people on the spectrum many times learn in pictures rather than in words.
Which she has a book called, I think it's called Learning in Pictures.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm sure we'll be sharing tons of her
stuff
as resources.
That's your job. You're sharing the Temple stuff. So she was talking about how they learn in pictures. And so in order for them to conceptualize anything, so let's say we're talking about a ball, just a ball, okay? She had to see thousands of examples of different balls and non-examples of these are not balls in order to create the concept of a ball in her brain. So she had to see a basketball, a baseball, a soccer ball, a little Nerf ball. You know, she had to see all these these are all balls that you play with, and these are not. And so they showed her, like, I mean, things that were not shaped like a sphere, that didn't look like they were played with at this point. Right. So, but she said, so when you're teaching a student on the spectrum a new concept, show them as many examples and non-examples as you possibly can, and get them to categorize them, because that way they can wrap their brain around that new concept. And I'm like, wow, that is huge. It's huge. And how many more other kids would that help?
Right.
Besides kids on the spectrum.
Well, just like I said, when you hear her speak, and I will say, like, she is a very, very successful person, you know, in many aspects of her life. However, when you sit down and you listen to her speak, maybe not everybody, but those educated and then know what to look for, her characteristics, the characteristics that she has that, you know, put her on the spectrum are very apparent.
Oh, yes.
It is very apparent, and some she draws attention to, some she does not. But I think she is a perfect example of a person finding how to be successful in life with
owning those.
And I will say this, though, and I've heard her mother speak. You weren't with me that time.
No,
I heard her mother speak, and I will just say her mother was the best advocate. She is what made, you know, early intervention. Her mother provided that early intervention, and that's what made her what she is now. And I will tell you, we can talk about Temple Green. You can talk to me about her.
We could do an entire live just on Temple.
I've never really met many, like, celebrities or whatever. I mean, and but I have seen a few in airports, and I have went up and got, like, autographs here and there or whatever, and whatever. I was like,
she was so fangirling.
I was. It was like it was fantastic. And she's just, you just need to learn as much as you can about her and read. I used to have the movie. Someone borrowed it. If you're out there, did you
borrow Betsy's movie?
Yes, she has. Kathy, she has written books. She's written many books, actually, and I can't off the top of my head.
We'll post them.
Yeah, we'll post them. And I actually, believe it or not, Kathy, I don't have any.
Well, good. Now I know what to get you for your birthday this year.
So, if I did, I used to have the movie, and someone borrowed it. If you borrowed it.
Betsy wants her movie back.
I want my movie back. But yeah, she... oh
my gosh, we've been going on for forever.
We have. So,
longest live ever. Yes. I think we lost people.
Hey,
but we gained some.
We did.
That's right. So anyway, this was just our identification evaluation overview.
I'm going to say autism is something, there's never enough time.
Right. And they are some of our favorite kids. Oh my gosh. Because they're like, each of them are their own little project for us to, what are the barriers? What can we help them with? How can we slide in supports in an unobtrusive way?
Yes. And because they are so black and white, it sometimes makes things a little easier in the sense that you clearly, it is very obvious if something's going to work or not.
Yes, for sure.
And when they do start picking up on some humor and sarcasm, that's
right.
That's fantastic.
Well, next week on The Tall and the Short of It, we are going to be diving further into autism in the school environment. So join us next week for that. If you are a teacher working with kids in your classroom and you want more knowledge on autism, or if you're a parent and you're looking for ways to help your kid with, whatever they're doing for school, there might be some great tips.
Also, if you have specific questions like, hey, what are some things that we could do in a classroom for this sensory need or things like that?
Absolutely.
Go ahead. We can, and here's what we always say. We don't always have the answers, but my answer is I haven't figured it out yet. And so I will.
For sure.
We'll figure it out.
So send us questions. Feel free to, and on the 1st of April, just a few days ago, I had said on my intro post for this month, if you have stories about how autism has impacted your life or your child or anything like that, we would love for you to share this month on our page. That is how we create awareness. That's how we, is doing that. And or if you're an adult on the spectrum and you want to share your story, we would love that. Of course, if you are posting a picture, make sure you have permission. If it's not your kid,
yes,
or else we will have to take that down.
Yeah.
So just we would just love to have any kind of stories of how kids have impacted, or kids on the spectrum have impacted your life, or maybe you had a sibling.
Or if you are a parent or you have it, or what is something, if it has impacted your life, what is something you wish other people knew?
Oh, that's such a great question.
What is something like the public, like you're out and about, what is something you wish people knew?
Yes.
I think that's an important one because.
Yeah, that's great. I love that question.
Even, we're even still always learning.
Absolutely.
And,
every time.
Figuring out.
Because every time we meet a new student with autism, we meet a new student with autism, right?
Yep. We just keep filling up our bag of tools and resources and all that.
That's right.
So.
All right, well, that's it today from the tall and the short of it. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Wrong hand again. I can't win.
We'll never get it.